Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday, everybody. Today's episode is being filmed at a conference where I'm speaking at, and so I'm in a side room. There may be a bit of an echo in here. My apologies in advance for the audio quality. We also note that today, August 22nd, is the 120th anniversary of the birth of modern Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. Now, let's begin today's video with the economy, and first up, the housing crisis. An increasing number of cities are doing away with restrictions on developers pricing new homes below a set level, putting downwards pressure on existing homes and increasing concern for land use sales, critical to local government fiscal health and consumer confidence. US-based Bloomberg reports that in Beijing, a sudden 18% price cut in May at a mid-sized residential project on the city's outskirts has forced adjacent new developers to follow suit. Near the southern border, the Shenzhen government approved a 29% cut in unit prices for a complex compared with a year ago. According to China Index Holdings Limited, after intervening for years, at least 10 city governments have relaxed or scrapped new home price guidance to let market demand play a bigger role. According to Centerline Group, prices of second-hand homes in Shenzhen have plunged 37% from a peak in May 2021. They've tanked by about 27% in Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou from their respective peaks too. Chen Wenjing, a research director at property agency China Index Holdings, expressed in a note this week, quote, "Restrictions on home price declines have hindered developers' sales since mid-2021. Easing or removing such restrictions will allow them to set prices reasonably," end quote. Bloomberg writes, quote, "In a fundamental shift, existing home sales overtook that of new ones in China for the first time last year, as buyers hunted for better bargains. New home values have declined about 7.2% from June 2021, about half of the 13.6% drop seen in existing home prices." Meanwhile, Beijing is considering a new funding option for local governments to buy unsold homes after a series of rescue packages failed to prop up the market. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reports that the latest proposal would allow local governments to fund their home purchases by issuing so-called special bonds, the proceeds of which are currently restricted to uses including infrastructure and environmental projects. Local governments have already used more than half of the 3.9 trillion yuan, half a trillion US dollars, quota for special bond issuance this year. It's unclear what portion of the remainder may be directed towards home purchases if the plan is approved. Of course, this once again raises the question of funding. Local governments will have little fiscal space left unless Beijing is once again willing to increase their deficit cap. Meanwhile, UK-based Financial Times, in a piece called "China's 70 billion Property Rescue Plan Limps Off Starting Line," writes that Beijing unveiled a plan in May for the People's Bank of China and state banks to mobilize up to half a trillion RMB, 70 billion US dollars, in lending to support local government enterprises to buy up unsold property. Local governments would then lease the property as social housing. Quote, "But the latest figures from the People's Bank of China show that the banks have lent only 24.7 billion RMB under the scheme, prompting the central bank this month to promise to accelerate the program. Analysts said one of the problems was that the relending scheme relied on the assumption that rental yields would be high enough to justify the outlay for state banks. Authorities have stressed that institutions must, quote, make their own decisions and bear their own risks," end quote. Harry Hu, chief China economist at Macquarie, expressed to the outlet, quote, "My sense is that the credit risks are still too high for banks," end quote, adding that, quote, "local state-owned enterprises may also lack the incentive given low rental yields," end quote. And while we're on housing, I wanted to note one more concerning update. The following is from state-run The Beijing News, so this is a state media article itself. The piece is called "A Dangerous Game, Zero Down Payment for Home Purchases and Loan Swaps Reappear. Is it really attractive or a trap?" Quote, "The property developer first deposits the down payment into my bank account, and then I transfer this money to the developer's designated account. Zero down payment means the developer prepays the down payment for me. The actual transaction price of the house is 1.35 million yuan, and with high appraisal and high loan, I get a loan of 1.34 million yuan, which is equivalent to zero down payment for the house. A home buyer told a reporter that for those with insufficient savings, zero down payment for home purchases is the fastest way to get a house. Another home buyer told the reporter, although mortgage rates are still falling, as an early home buyer with an existing mortgage, my mortgage rate is still close to 5%. Using consumer loans to repay the mortgage might be an option. Zero down payment for home purchases is usually achieved by real estate developers or real estate intermediaries prepaying the down payment or artificially inflating the home price to obtain the down payment through a mortgage loan from the bank, said a risk warning issued by the Zhengzhou Housing Security and Real Estate Administration Bureau on August 2nd. Zero down payment not only fails to fundamentally solve the short-term funding shortage of home buyers, but also usually requires signing dual contracts and inflating home prices, which are illegal practices. This not only increases the loan interest and monthly mortgage payment burden for home buyers, but also poses significant legal risks of loan fraud. End quote. Next up, we have two more economic updates to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing is a tremendous help for the algorithm and helping the channel grow. I'm doing this on the sidelines of a conference that I'm at, so if I can do that, I think 2 clicks of the mouse shouldn't be too much to ask. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, UK-based The Financial Times reports that Beijing will impose a 6-month business ban and a large fine on international accounting giant PricewaterhouseCoopers as part of punishment over its audit of collapsed property developer Evergrande. PwC China told its clients it expects Chinese authorities to hit it with a 6-month business ban that will start as early as September. The action against the accounting firm comes after China's securities regulator in March said Evergrande had inflated its mainland revenues by almost $80 billion in the 2 years before the developer defaulted on its debts in 2021, kicking off the years-long housing crisis, despite PwC China's unit giving the accounts a clean bill of health. Commentators have pointed out that this is more a symbolic warning going after a symptom of the issue rather than the cause. Much like rating agencies in the lead-up to the 2008 global financial crisis, all the housing developers in the run-up to the housing crisis were acting recklessly in a highly speculative market. All accounting firms at the time had expected to get on board with the program or risk being shown the door. Indeed, Evergrande's in-house chief economist was pushed out of the company after warning of serious liquidity risks with the developer. And finally, for the economy, China's 2024 summer box office to date has fallen short of industry expectations, reporting a stunning 44% decline versus 2023 numbers over the same period. State-run Xinhua even admits, quote, "This downturn has sent ripples through the world's second-largest film market, prompting introspection and analysis from industry insiders." End quote. Chen Jin, an analyst at movie data platform Beacon, notes that the 2024 summer season has seen the release or scheduling of around 140 films, matching last summer's total, but revenue is still down, and by quite a lot, suggesting that consumers have either changed consumption behavior or consumption generally is down. Data from other areas suggests the latter. This isn't good for China's many cinemas rapidly constructed during the boom years, putting further pressure on already stressed commercial real estate. Cinemas act as important anchors in large malls or similar complexes. However we look at it, a 44% decline year on year is quite concerning and a bad sign of things to come. We will have to continue to follow the industry closely. Next up, and finally for today, we move to the EU-China trade relationship, which looks to be deteriorating into a full-blown trade war. Yesterday, Wednesday, China's Commerce Ministry announced an investigation has been launched into EU dairy in response to an application submitted by the Dairy Association of China and the China Dairy Industry Association on behalf of the domestic industry in July. The ministry said it requested a consultation with the EU government over the probe on the 7th of August. The investigation will look into certain dairy products originating from the EU, including fresh cheese, curd and blue cheese, and the period to be probed is set between the 1st of April 2023 and the 31st of March 2024. It will also examine any damage done to related Chinese industries from the 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of March 2024, according to the ministry. A total of 20 EU subsidies will be investigated, including those from the bloc's Common Agricultural Policy, as well as subsidy programs initiated by EU members such as Ireland, Austria, Belgium and Italy. The probe is expected to end before the 21st of August 2025, but may be extended for half a year under special circumstances. Of course, Beijing denies it, but this is an obvious response to the EU decision the day before on EV tariffs, which we covered in yesterday's video. Dairy is a sensitive and politically influential industry in Europe. The EU's biggest subsidy program is the €60 billion a year Common Agricultural Policy, which consumes roughly a third of the bloc's budget. Alexander Anton, Secretary General of the European Dairy Association, said he was, quote, confident, end quote, that the CAP was compliant with WTO rules and that the EU and China, quote, will find a constructive way to resolve any bilateral disputes, end quote. European dairy exports to China were valued at about €1.8 billion last year, down from €2 billion a year earlier, according to European Commission trade data, and accounted for about 9.5% of the EU's total dairy exports. We note too that if this situation does spiral into a full-blown trade war, as the Europeans have a large trade deficit with China, China is much more vulnerable in general, but certain European industries are politically influential and could put pressure on European policymakers in the event of a full-blown conflict. How likely is such a conflict? Well, speaking at an event in Spain on Tuesday this week, the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, warned that a trade war with China may be unavoidable, explaining, quote, "We mustn't be naive. We have no interest to get into a trade war, but maybe it's unavoidable. It's also in the logic of things," end quote. Borrell, who is set to retire in October, said cheap Chinese-made products, including electric vehicles, are being diverted to the European market because of higher tariff rates in the United States. Quote, "They, the US, don't ask us when they ban the import of Chinese cars. They're not going to ask us where those Chinese cars are going if they're not going to the US. I'm sure they will go to the European market, and this is generating a competitiveness issue with our industry," end quote. As we discussed in yesterday's video, the EV industry is especially contentious in the EU-China trade relationship, but there are also several other probes into other industries that have both been heavily subsidized by the Chinese government, leading to accusations of overcapacity and dumping from many Western and non-Western trading partners. The Chinese, for their part, argue that the competitiveness is coming from the cheaper products themselves, stemming from China's dominance in advanced manufacturing. As we discussed in yesterday's video, the EV industry alone in China has enjoyed hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies from the government. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Again, I'm sorry that I'm filming this in a side room at this forum. Hopefully there was not too much of an audio issue. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a great Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.